Hey guys, Brian here. Today's video, we're going to be rebuilding this walnut keyboard that I started about 6 months ago, and we're going to be giving it an aluminum case with a brass plate. So this keyboard is a project I started about 6 months ago, and this is something that I started to make on my PrintNC, and then I just kind of got distracted and started to build the PrintNC. So now that we have a complete machine, we're going to kind of put it to the test and see what it can do here. So we're going to have a solid bottom piece with a trim piece around the top, and then this aluminum plate will then become our brass plate. So while we're on the topic of material here, I want to give a huge shout out to this video's sponsor, Metals Supermarkets in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was able to source all this material for this build. Their staff was fast and courteous, and I was able to get all of this material cut to size. Not only are they fast, but they also have no material minimums for the material you want. So if you're in the eastern Iowa area, be sure to check them out and tell them that Brian sent you. Thanks, Metals Supermarkets. Well, nothing like breaking a bit on your final toolpath. So everything was going great, and then I went around for my final pass here. Literally the last toolpath, I had like 2 minutes left. If you guys haven't noticed already, I'm doing a 2D adaptive all the way around because slotting is hard. And when you do 2D adaptive in Fusion, you have to model your own tabs, and it's like 10 times as much work as just having a contour with automatic tabs. So I accepted that, and I knew that I would plunge a little bit into this tab, but then when it got all the way over, I didn't account for the fact it would be plunging right into the tab just ever so slightly.
on this side. So I think I'm going to leave it because I have to clean up the outside edge anyway, and you can see it's just a very small little lip there that will clean up no problem. So we're going to go ahead and flip it, and we will move on. All right, so I have everything cleaned up and everything's all finished. I didn't want to spare you guys with all the sanding and stuff. You'll notice that I did some stair stepping on the bottom of the base, and I have since gotten rid of that. It took a little bit of elbow grease, but that cleaned up pretty nice. I gave everything a nice brushed finish with some 220, and that seems to turn out pretty good on the finishing side. That looks gorgeous. So I did have to do some shaping. I did break an end mill on the finishing pass of this guy here. So the entire bottom portion was, you know, it had what, 20 thousandths on it. So I did have to kind of shape the metal a little bit. In that process, I did kind of lose my outside chamfer on the top piece here. I don't know if the camera is going to pick that up, but I kind of lost my outside chamfer. So not the end of the world, but it just would have been nice to have that nice clean chamfer there. So we'll kind of just live with it, I guess. So not a huge deal. But I'll talk about kind of the assembly here. So this is going to be a top mount keyboard design, or should I say it was going to be a top mount design. What that means is that this plate, so this is what the switches will mount into. This will basically mount on the underside of the top piece, so you can see my fingers here. So this was a two-sided operation, and it was actually my first two-sided operation ever. So that was kind of nerve-wracking, but it worked out. So I flipped this over and then milled out my little fingers here, and then I also milled down this part here. That way, when the plate comes in here, it'll sit inside those fingers, and then it will sit flush. I hope the camera's picking that up okay. And it will sit flush. And so the benefit of this from a keyboard standpoint is that every switch will sound and feel very similar. You won't have any rough spots or anything. So that's the theory behind a top mount design. I was going to go with a full out gasket mount design, but I felt like, for my first, 3-piece keyboard here, I was gonna kind of keep it relatively simple. A tray mount would have been the most simple, but I felt like this was a good compromise between, feel and, ease of machining. And speaking of ease of machining, we'll go back to the two-sided operation. It went okay. It did not go perfect. And so I had my top piece here. When I flipped it, I wasn't exactly perfect. I mean, I'm probably nitpicking here, but you can see how the fingers are closer to the edge on the top than the bottom. So I'm not sure if the camera is going to pick that up or not, but it still worked out. However, you guys can probably tell here, that means that my brass plate had to be modified to fit. So my fingers took a little hit up top, and then I had to kind of go over it, all the edges, with my strip sander. So you won't be able to see this once it's put together, but that was kind of a disappointment, I guess you could say, as far as fitment goes. So how this is going to work is my plate will go and rest on the inside of my top mount piece here. Something like this. And so another thing that didn't go to plan is I had intended to drill and tap mounting holes inside the fingers here. And you can kind of see the little holes there that the plate would mount into. And so that way, when you put the plate in here, you would be able to put an M3 hole right here, or an M3 bolt right here. So my tap was not long enough, or should I say the hole was not deep enough, and so I wasn't able to tap these threads. My tap didn't grab, so we had to compromise a little bit and improvise. And so what I've done here is I've got my base. I went ahead and printed these little TPU inserts. And so these little inserts will then keep the plate squished between the bottom and the top. So I'll go ahead and put those in here, and you guys can kind of see what that looks like. So now that they're all in place, and what I'll end up doing is I'll super glue these in, that way they don't move. And then the plate will rest on the bumpers. And this actually kind of acts like a gasket mount in a way. And so I wasn't planning on this, but it actually worked out that way. And then my top plate can come in. And I was able to thread my M3s for the actual case assembly. And then that will sit on there like that. So as far as the electronics portion, I won't get into this too deep. I'm not sure if that's the scope of this video really, but what I have here is a bunch of Amoeba, they call them Amoeba Pcbs, and this is basically a bunch of single switch PCBs that you can then wire into a matrix And then that matrix gets wired up to a little PrintNC board here. This is basically an Arduino. It's a small Arduino with more I/O pins for a keyboard like this. So it will run on QMK firmware, and this is the firmware I've already designed. I might have to make a couple tweaks to get it exactly how I want it, but this will be the electronics portion of the build. I've also added Milmax hot swap sockets, so that's going to be hard to focus there, but every hole or every switch, so basically every switch will push into these little holes here. And then there's your connection. I don't have to solder the switches in, so that's kind of a nice benefit. So I've gone ahead and got all of the switches inside the plate here, and they just press in, and then I got all of the Amoebas wired in on the back, and it was kind of a pain in the butt to get all these single switch PCBs pushed onto the switches at the same time. So I did have a bad input on the PrintNC here, so I had to use one of these pins on the back. I actually have a couple bad inputs on this guy, so just gotta improvise a little bit, but not a big deal. And there it is, all assembled, minus keycaps. Alright guys, I went ahead and threw the keycaps on. I think this video is getting a little long, so we're probably going to wrap it up. But this is the final product here. And I think it turned out pretty good. Not perfect by any means, but I went ahead and added some bumpers on the back here. The case is cut at a 5-degree angle, but I wanted to give it a little more. So that is going to do it for this video, guys. If you like what you see, feel free to subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.